Hey everyone, and welcome to Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and I'm reading through the Bible in 365 days in chronological order using the 1-year Bible reading plan. It's actually the 1-year chronological Bible reading plan, and you can find it online at oneyearbibleonline.com. And you would just click on chronological, download your reading plan. It is a free reading plan. Today it's June 15th, and we are on day 167, which puts us at 2 Kings 2 and 4. So we've been going through the book of Kings, learning all about the Kings. We're actually in with prophets today, not necessarily in Kings, but we are in the book of Kings. So the purpose and point of this is that I want people to be reading their Bibles. And I've mentioned it a million times, but I think it's just really important and really key. Reading is a discipline that no one really loves anymore. And if they do read, they're reading like fiction, and they're not really reading a Bible. The Bible is a difficult read. It's not meant to be easy. I don't think it's meant to get us to dig in and to challenge and to grow and to be in prayer with the Lord as we're doing it. So it's not even just a matter of you read it, you kind of get some information, you digest it, and you move on. It's really being in relationship with the Lord as you're reading. So I love that you are coming to listen or to watch this. I think that's awesome, and I'm super excited, and that can help spread the word. But the most important thing and the key is to read your Bible. So get into it. It's like a 20 to 30 minute reading per day. Longer if you spend more time, like maybe taking notes or praying beforehand or praying afterwards about what you have read, and then how to implement that in your life. And so then while I'm here, I share a little bit about what we read, and then I try to compare it to what's going on with the world now, to talk about how it affects us as people who follow Christ, right? So I am a follower of Christ, so I'm a Christian. And so right now we're learning about the God of the Old Testament, which obviously is also the God of the New Testament, but that will all connect down the road. So I'm just going to start us in our reading today because a lot of it takes place with Elisha. And so let's get started. Okay. So again, we're day 167, June 14th. June 15th. I don't know if I said June 14th already, and it's not the first time I would have done that, but it's June 15th. And again, we are 167, 2 Kings 2 and 4. So, okay. So Elijah is the prophet in the kingdom of Israel. There is a northern kingdom. There is a southern kingdom. I always do weird hands. Northern kingdom and southern kingdom of Israel. So David conquered, and he had all 12 tribes connected, plus he kind of conquered some other territories and added other areas into the tribes of Israel. And so when Solomon was king, who was David's son, he was all over all of these tribes. Solomon messed up by following his wives' gods. And so God took the kingdom from Solomon's son. And so Solomon's son was Rehoboam, and he was in charge of Judah, Benjamin, and the tribe of the Levites, which wasn't really a tribe, it was the priests. And then Jeroboam was in charge of the northern kingdom, Israel, which was the other 10 tribes. So you have northern kingdom and southern kingdom. Southern kingdom is Judah and Benjamin and the tribe of the Levites, and they are mostly at this point following the Lord. We've gotten into a king that they are not following the Lord, right? So we moved into Jehoram, who was not following the Lord, but Asa was really strong in following the Lord, and his son Jehoshaphat was following the Lord. In the northern kingdom, not one king that we've had so far has followed the Lord. Not one. Now, no one's going to say they don't know who God is, right? And there were followers still in Israel. So like scattered throughout Israel, there were still followers. There were still prophets up there, right? So God didn't give up on them. God didn't completely let them go, right? Because he is a good God, and because he picked Israel to be sort of, I want to say, his mouthpiece. So the longer I'm in the Old Testament, the more I'm recognizing all of the things that God has done to allow the rest of the world to see him. And this is one of the things that he's done, right? So he created this people group, right? He pulled this people group out from Egypt, and he created this people group in order to say, this is the people group that God is going to spend time with, the God that made the universe, right? The creator of all things, beginning, no end. That's that God. He spends time with these Israelites, and everyone is welcome to see this God and to worship this God. The people he's chosen, because he's chosen them, there's a special connection he has with them. And I think that follows all the way through to today. So I don't think we ever kind of lose that as the Israelites, that he's kind of always there for them first, but he has also expanded himself out to the whole entire world. And they are meant to show the entire world who he is. And it's for all of us to join, right? Like everyone here has the ability to worship the one true God. So I think that's point and purpose. And so he has not given up on the northern kingdom, right? They are not too far gone, so to speak, to be saved and to continue to come back and follow the Lord, right? He consistently gives them more chances. And so I'm saying that because Elijah is in the northern kingdom. He's a prophet in the northern kingdom, right? He has slaughtered hundreds of prophets of Baals, right, that were following with Jezebel and Ahab. And he does all of these miracles for the people in Israel so they know who God is. He consistently followed the Lord. He did miracles under the name of the Lord. And so then people would know who the Lord is, right? So then there was never nobody. And as a matter of fact, God even told him there was going to be a remnant of 7,000. So he was never completely alone, although he did feel alone. At one point, he meets with God, Elijah, and God tells him he's going to pick a new king for Aram. He's going to pick a new king for Israel, and the top half, Israel. And he's going to pick a new prophet who is Elisha. And so that's who he's with today. So Elijah is with Elisha. This is going to be Elijah's last day on earth. And so what we see is he does a little bit of traveling. So Elisha goes first to, he says he's with Elijah. Elijah is with Elisha, and he says, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." And Elisha, I'm sorry, it's going to be so confusing. Elisha says, "I'm going to follow you anywhere." So he's like, "Okay, come with me." So they go to Bethel. There's a whole bunch of prophets there. The prophets come out and they say, "You know, your guy is not going to be with us after today." And he's like, "I know, be quiet." And then he goes, and then Elijah then is called to Jericho. That's the second place he goes to. Jericho is that place that was torn down, but then rebuilt. And the guy's sons died when he rebuilt Jericho. And he says the same thing. He says, "You stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me." And he says, "Nope, I'm going with you." So we can see that Elisha, who is going to be the next prophet, is consistently, he wants to follow, right, this man of God. He always wants to be right next to this man of God. So no matter where that man of God goes, he wants to be right next to that man of God. And then he goes, and then it's the same thing happens. People come out and they say he's going to die. And he's like, "I know, be quiet." And I feel like there's something to that, but I'm not sure what that is. Like him telling, because I don't know if he's like, shut up, right? I don't know if it's that kind of be quiet, or if he's literally saying like, "I know, be quiet," like bringing it down. I'm not really sure in what direction that be quiet is. I don't know contextually where the emphasis is on that. It doesn't really say, it doesn't really expand on it. Like, were they being jerks and he was yelling at them? Because we use that expression all the time, like, whatever, be quiet, right? Or was it used differently and he's just telling them really maybe not to discuss it, right? So it could be, I think, a few different things. But just keeping that in your brain. All right, and then he's going to the Jordan. And so it's the same thing. Elisha's like, "Okay, I'm going to follow you to Jordan." And then it says 50 men from the company of prophets went and stood at a distance facing where Elijah was. And then Elijah touches his cloak in the water. The waters part, which sounds familiar, right? So we have two circumstances in which the waters parted. One was the Jordan. One was the Red Sea. So Moses put his staff down and the waters parted. And then, oh, it's so funny as I'm thinking about it. So Moses did that, right, with his staff. So he was leading with his staff, right? I'm going to say maybe leading with wisdom. And then Joshua parted the Jordan, and he did that with his spear. And so I'm going to, and then they went to war, right? So after that, they all went to war after that. And now Elijah comes and does it as the prophet with his cloak. The thing that they wear as protection all the time, the thing that they wear and they travel with, right? Like this is a thing that offers them, the cloak was really important in these times. So it gave them a place to sleep. It gave them a place to stay away from the warmth. It protected them from things falling, like rain or anything falling on them. So their cloak was actually a really important thing. And that's why you're going to see later, like when cloaks are offered up and things like that, it's very special and unique. It's not like maybe what we would consider a coat, that we maybe have 5, 6, 7 of them to match with our outfits. And really all it does is keep us warm. This was much bigger and much more of a thing for when they would travel, because they would travel differently than we would travel, right? They would travel by foot or by donkey, right? Where we just travel by car and we can get far distances in short amounts of time in comfort. That wasn't necessarily in comfort, right? So their cloaks were a big deal. So we see 3 different partings of the water on dry land, and 3 different sort of instruments or tools in which they did it for different meanings for different people, right? And I'm just going to say, like, what we find in the end is God is all of those things, right? He is our protection. He does lead us in battle, right? He is wise. So he does all of those things. Right? He leads the way. And so he is all those things. So I love how much he gives us picture stories of what those things look like. Okay. So anyway, so they watch him, and then they cross over the Jordan. And then so in verse 9, it says, when they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken from you. And Elisha says, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. This is a really unique phrase. Not the double portion part, because obviously he just wants more of it, right? Like that's like Solomon asking for more wisdom, right? He wants a double portion of it. But of your spirit, is that necessarily the Holy Spirit that he's been given through the Lord? Possibly. Is that just whatever it is that has Elijah as a prophet to the Lord, right? Like the connection between the Lord and Elijah as a prophet? Possibly, right? So, or is it there's something in his heart that's different, that he wants some of that, right? And maybe it's all of those things. Maybe it's all of the above. But he's asking for a double portion of it. Elijah was the guy who did a ton of miracles, had an amazing connection with the Lord, right? Like even where he didn't ask to he didn't reach out to God and the Lord and ask him, like, oh, if I touch my cloak, will you part the waters? He just did it. So there was such a connection between Elijah and the Lord. And all, even when we go back to when he killed his 450 prophets, it says it was what the Lord did, but we don't hear really the conversation between them. So there's a big connection between Elijah and the Lord, and through all the miracles that he did. Okay, so he says a double portion. So then he follows up and he says in verse 10, you've asked a difficult thing, yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, this will be yours. So the double portion will be yours. Otherwise, it won't. So if he sees whatever miracle it is that God does when Elijah is taken, then Elisha will get the double portion of his spirit. We're going to find out that does happen. So it says, as they were walking along and talking together, suddenly, and this is another illustration that I love, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the 2 of them. We have seen God show up in fire over and over and over again. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and he tore it in 2. So Elisha saw him no more, tore the garment in 2. He wasn't really dead, right? His body didn't die. His body didn't rot. His body didn't decay. He was lifted. He was sort of taken up. The only other person that we ever saw that from was way back in the beginning. And of course, I'm going to forget his name. I want to say Edom, but that's definitely not his name. It's in Genesis, and he's another guy that was taken up after he turned 60. It says he turned toward the Lord, and then he was taken up in the end. It never says that he died. So now we find this Elijah is then taken up as well. Actually, Moses was also. Moses didn't die either. And so we see these things. Obviously, he's going to get a double portion of wisdom. And then he goes back. It says Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen. He took the cloak, struck the water with it, and then he says, where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? And when he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. So unlike Elijah, who, again, I'm going to say at that moment didn't necessarily pray, we see that Elisha, this happened, God allowed him to see it, whatever miracle it was that he saw, that's probably way beyond our understanding. He got to see this miracle, and then Elisha asked for God to be with him, and then the waters parted, which I'm going to say is the confirmation that God said, yes, this is for you, right? You saw this, and now it's confirmed. His spirit is with you. And then we obviously see his spirit is with him. So then this company of prophets sees him. They were watching, and it says the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. So again, he gets this double portion of spirit, and now we see Elijah's there. Does that mean Elijah's always with him? Again, another thing that's like sort of maybe past beyond our understanding, right? So what that might be, so trying to sort of work that out. And then these guys are like, hey, we're going to go look for him. So obviously everyone has died at this point. So they're like, hey, we're going to go look for him. At the very least, because they had, if you guys remember, they had gotten word that he wasn't going to be with them after today. So they probably knew he was going to die, but they thought he was going to die under regular means. So they went out to go probably look for his body. And then after 3 days, they couldn't find his body. So here we go with that number 3 again. So they were unable to find his body. They came back, and Elisha was kind of like, I told you so. Obviously, he didn't say that, but he means I told you so. He said, didn't I tell you not to go? I feel like it's the same thing. All right, so now here we go. Elisha's got a whole bunch of miracles. I'm not going to go into super detail about all of them, just a really brief synopsis of them, but I find them interesting. They're all a little bit different, and I feel like they all bring up different things that he's able to do, right? Some seem amazing, and one seems terrible. Let's hear it. All right, so the first one. We are in 2 Kings 2, starting in 19. The people of the city said to Elisha, look, our Lord, this town, they're calling Elisha our Lord. This town is well situated, as you can see, but the water is bad, and the land is unproductive. So he takes this bowl, he does this thing, and then it cleans out all the water. By the way, not scientifically, miraculously. It cleans out. Get some of these, read it clean, right? Read it clean, read it for what it says. Try to steer away from some of our go-tos that say, well, if you use a metal bowl and you bring it to the surface of the what, right? Like, so try and, if at all possible, just eliminate some of that if you can, and come to it with a clean, open heart to see all the things that Elisha is able to do through the power of the Lord. All right, so it says, so he says, because he throws salt in it. Now, does salt clean the water? In general, I'm going to say no. So it says, he says, I've healed this water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. So boom, water is healed. You throw salt in it, water is healed. Next one is he's walking down the road, and there's some guys, and they say, baldy. They're making fun of him. They're mocking him. And okay, so they're mocking him. This is one of the tough stories. And this is the one I have to keep going, like, ugh. They're mocking him. And then he turns around and he gets a bear to maul 42 of them. So it says, he turned around and looked at them and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. And then he went on to Mount Carmel. This is a tough one, right? So if you read this, and especially if you're somebody who's not a believer, right? And you read the story and you go, how can God say that that's okay? He asks the Lord, how can God say that's okay? Listen, I don't want to say it's okay. It is, because it's God. And so there's a reality to it. It is hard to digest. And I want to pick it apart. And I want to say things like, well, obviously they're awful men. Well, they didn't follow the Lord. Possibly all of these things are true, right? Very likely they're true, because they are in the nation of Israel, where the king is not following the Lord. He's turning to all these other gods, right? So he's turning away from the Lord, turning to all these other gods, and he's not doing what's right in the eyes of the Lord. So I'm going to just open that up and say that just opens a door to, I want to say, the Lord not being with you. Because they're turning from the Lord. It's not that the Lord is turning from them. It's they're turning from the Lord. It's a tough story, right? All that being said, I'm going to kind of give a synopsis at the end of what I think the point of that is. But that's a tough one, right? So kind of sit on that. Next one is where he helps a widow. So in 2 Kings 4:1, it says, the wife of a man from the company of the prophets of Elijah cried out to Elisha, your servant, my husband, is dead. He was a prophet. He died. And now she's got a kid and she's got no money. And he says, okay, now, obviously olive oil or oil is extremely, I'm saying obviously because of what happens. it's very expensive. A pot doesn't seem to be as, it doesn't seem to matter as much as the oil inside the pot matters. So she had a little bit of oil, and he said, how can I help you? And then he said, go out and go ask all of your neighbors for empty pots. And maybe another side of that is an empty pot you would give back, right? Like you borrow an empty pot and then you can give that back. But if you borrow oil, you're taking it, it's done, and no one else gets that oil. So she borrows all of these pots, and with her little itty bitty bit of olive oil, he says, pour it into those pots. And she pours and pours and pours until every single pot is full. So she's gotten all these pots from all the neighbors, and she does it until every single one of these is full. And so then she's able to use all of that oil to sell all of that oil and live on the money, and then use whatever is left for herself. So he gives her that, miracle. And then we have another one down here. It says, one day Elisha went to Shunem, and there was a woman in there. She had a lot of money, and so she kind of made a bed for him. And so he came in, and he lived there every once in a while, and she was like, make everything nice for him. And at one point he was like, what can I do for you? And so she said, I think she starts up kind of like saying nothing. And then she explains that she has no children. So her husband is old and she has no children. And as I've said probably on numerous occasions, it was really, really important then for women to have children for any number of reasons. One really glaringly obvious one here is that her husband was old, which means he was going to die, and then there would be nobody to take care of her. So she might be well-to-do, but she would still be in an area where no one was left to take care of her, and that money might eventually run out, and she would have nobody to care for her. And so having a child, at least having a son, would be a protector for her, as well as a financial release for her, right? So she would be able to live with a son. So she says, I have an old husband and I have no son. And so he allows her to get pregnant. So he gives her the ability to be pregnant. So she winds up having a son. And then Elisha is gone because he's obviously in and out, which it seems over a few years, he's in and out of that house. And then he's gone. And then the son starts to grow up. At one point, he maybe falls or whatever. He starts crying about his head. The dad brings him in, sits him with the mom, and the boy dies. And she just loses it, which would obviously make sense. She loses it. She runs out to Elisha, and it's an interesting exchange because he sends a servant out and says, ask her what's going on, ask her if the boy is okay, and she says everything is fine. And then she goes up to him and she lays at his feet. So maybe it was that she didn't want to deal with a servant. She just really wanted to go and be in the presence of Elisha because he's the one who gave her the son. And so he gave her the son and sort of lifted her hopes up that everything would be good and amazing for her in the future. And then this son dies. And so she said, didn't I ask you not to get my hopes up? And then you can tell, well, to me, it seems like you can tell Elijah is upset. He sends his servant and his staff, right? Literal staff, like a wooden staff. And he sends him to the boy, and he has him lay the staff on the boy. And then once he gets there, it's like the boy is dead. He's laid the staff on the boy. They've recognized he's dead. And so Elisha comes in. And here we go. It says, when Elisha, I'm going down to verse 32. When Elisha reached the house, there was a boy lying dead on the couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. So we saw him praying at the water. Through all of these other miracles, we haven't really seen it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I want to be really clear. But they're noting this because there's importance in this. So maybe in the other ones, the job wasn't that big, right? I don't know. I'm putting out ideas. Maybe in the other ones, he already had it in his spirit, or he already had a connection with the Lord. And in this one, it was big. And so he needed to pray to the Lord. And it says, so he closed the door on the two of them. He prayed to the Lord. And then he does a few things. He gets on the bed and lays with him, mouth to mouth, hands to hands, eyes to eyes, right? So he's like right there on him. He lays on the boy, stretches himself out on his body. And then he turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got back on the bed and did it again. I'm not saying this is how we should handle situations, right? But I feel like there's, again, an importance to this physical connection with him. He gets up, takes a break, comes back, has this physical connection with him again. And then it says, the boy sneezed 7 times, maybe number of completion, and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned his servant and said, call the mom. And then he said, take your son And then she fell at his feet and bowed to the ground. And then here we go with our last one. I think this is the last one with a famine. 2 Kings 4:38. Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in that region. While the company of the prophets was meeting with him, he said to the servant, "Put on a large pot and cook some stew." So there's a famine. Obviously, things aren't growing. There's no food in the area. He's going to feed everybody. Someone decides to go out and they get all of these things, no one really knows what they are, off of a vine, comes in, puts them in the stew, and then they're like, "Man of God, this stew's messed up. We're all going to die." There's death in the pot. Elisha says, "Get some flour." Again, not a miracle ingredient. We all use it all the time. Get some flour. He puts it in the pot and he says, "Serve it to the people to eat." There was nothing harmful in the pot. So he changed the food. Verse 33. And then he goes, verse 42. A man comes from Baal Shalishah, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread from the first ripe grain, along with some heads of new grain. "Give it to the people to eat," Elisha says. And they're like, "It's not enough." And then Elisha answers, "Give it to the people to eat, for this is what the Lord says. They will eat and have some left over." Then he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over, according to the Lord. I'm nodding and winking. I'm not really, but I'm nodding and winking. Giving out bread, having some extra to eat, give it to them. They're going to have it. Like, what didn't Elisha do? Like, wait until we get into the New Testament. We're going to be like, remember that, remember that, remember that, remember that. Okay, so we see he did a ton of miracles. Here's some of the stuff he did. He cleaned the water, so he cleaned their drinking source, right? So they will be not thirsty because of the Lord, right? Because this is all, everything that he did was through the Lord. He did not do it through himself. He did not do it through Elijah. He did it through the Lord, right? Because he was a prophet of the Lord. He was a special prophet that God had up there in Israel. So he cleaned the water. Here we go. He delivered justice. Again, ew, icky, yucky story, but he delivered justice, right? So he had the power to deliver justice because the Lord wouldn't have done it if it was not just. So he delivered justice. He provided financial means. So he provided finances for that woman so she could live her life. He brought life. So he made that woman pregnant. He gave her life so she was able to have the ability to conceive. And then he revived life. He brought someone back from the dead. This is not the first person that we've seen brought back from the dead. So he brought somebody back from the dead. He cleaned spoiled food so they will not be hungry. They can get their food when Elijah is near, right? A prophet of the Lord. And then he fed when there wasn't enough. So whenever that, just like the manna in Exodus, right? Like he fed and fed until they needed and wanted for nothing. And so Elisha is showing us, as well as all the people, what it looks like to be under the beauty of the Lord, right? This is what it means. With the Lord, you will have all of these things, right? You will not go hungry because of the Lord. You will not thirst because of the Lord. Now, Elisha did them all very literally, and certainly there were people in that area that died of starvation, right? There was a famine. I'm certain there were people that died. He cleaned their food, right? So when there was dirty food, he cleaned their food. So he was healing. He was able to heal all that stuff. So there were all of these things that he did. With the Lord, all these things are true, right? And it's just a dependence on the Lord, right? That's what we need to do, is we have a dependence on the Lord. And it's not saying that you will have 6 beach houses and you will live until you're 300. It's not having these ridiculous things, but it's having your full dependence on the Lord, recognizing that these are all of the things that he does for us as followers of him. And that he's showing you through his prophet all the things that he can do. I hope that resonates. And not just like, hey, this guy was pretty awesome. I wish I could do as many miracles as this guy, right? Like, again, this is a picture of God's people to show the rest of the world who God is. So anyone who had contact with Elisha got to see the true Lord, right? They had their king doing what their king does, but they had Elisha coming in and actually showing them who the Lord was. And that's what's most important. So for those of us today, living in this time, living in this world, living in this country, a country that does not follow the Lord, and it is what it is, right? Like, I'm not saying we should continue to try to put people in government that follow the Lord. It would be great, but it's probably unrealistic, right? So we have to know that there is still Lord representation here on the earth. Are you it? Do you know someone who is it? What does it look like for those people who you know genuinely follow the Lord and love the Lord with all their hearts, all their minds, and all their souls, right? So that's it for today. Hopefully tomorrow we're going to get into some other stuff. And I actually went longer because I was like, it's only Elisha's miracles. I didn't think I would do too much, but I did. Sorry. So if you found this to be a blessing, I want you to like it. I want you to share it. I want you to subscribe to the channel. So do all of those things. Share it, share it, share it. Share it with as many people as possible. Get your friends in their Bible. Read one day and see if it connects. Read for a week after that and see if it connects. We read and then come here and listen and just see what God has to offer you. I promise it's more than you can have without him. And all that, I want you to keep reading, and I will see you guys tomorrow.